Hello, I'm Robert Barr, and I'd like to talk to you on salt and light. In Matthew 5:13 through 16, Jesus calls us to be salt and light. The world without God was chaos, as everyone did what was right in their own eyes. They were like babies who want what they want and don't care about anyone else, or what they want or what they need. Jesus states that we should be the salt of the earth. Salt is a preservative which prevents the growth of bacteria and germs. Children need discipline to help them develop an inner discipline where they can control their own behavior because they feel it's right, not because they're afraid of getting caught or punished. In the same way, we should seek to enact laws that prohibit bad things. God set down those things in the Ten Commandments that we should not do because they cause strife and division among us. And he illustrated the danger of violating them throughout the Bible. I've gone into them in detail in my series on the Christian life. While many say we are no longer under the law, there are many around us that have not committed their lives to Christ and need to be subject to laws to control them. People say we should not be involved in politics because it's corrupt. However, if we don't write the laws, the forces of darkness will. And we're seeing the result of that today. There are those who say we should defund the police, but the police are the ones who enforce the law. If the law isn't enforced, people will feel free to disobey it. Michigan had no real highway patrol back in the 1950s. Their state police were mainly policing rural areas where there was no law enforcement agencies, similar to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I was coming south one day on the expressway. I was head of an emergency rescue unit, and we were coming back from training in the North Woods. We were traveling in a convoy consisting of an ambulance and 4 other cars who were pulling trailers with equipment. At that time, people in the North Woods ignored speed signs because there was no enforcement. We were doing the speed limit, which was 70 miles an hour at the time, when a car raced past us. The ambulance driver radioed that he was going to give chase because the car had smoke rolling out from underneath it and might be on fire. He later stated that he had reached speeds of 120 miles an hour and clocked the vehicle at 110. He had trouble pulling him over because the driver was cruising along with about a dozen other cars. Since then, Michigan has built up its highway patrols and roads are much safer. In addition, the police cannot do it alone. They cannot be everywhere and depend on citizens to report crimes and to testify to what they've seen, so the criminals can be convicted and punished. In addition, the laws must have penalties. If the courts are lenient and don't punish criminals, criminals will feel no reason to obey the law. We're seeing the results of courts that do not punish criminals, and even people who use the courts to threaten and intimidate good people to prevent them from speaking the truth or enforcing the law. Churches tell me it does no good to stand up for what's right because people won't listen. I grew up in the 1950s, and at that time, the church was very vocal about what was right and what was wrong. It taught its people and also spoke out against evil in the public forum. As a result, people elected officials who supported Christian values, and they were taught in the schools, and were adhered to in the media and in the government. As a result, Christian values, or Christians mostly abided by them, and even many who had no church connection believed in and adhered to Christian values. As a result, those that broke the law were usually caught and punished. Today, the church is merely silent and does not teach Christian values. So most people, including church members, get their values from the media. Laws are not uniformly enforced either, and many people feel free to disobey them when they think they can get away with it. We see that on our highways, where many people seem to think the speed limits are mere suggestions. In addition, liberal politicians have promoted suspicions of police brutality, and many people see crimes and are afraid to report them or testify against criminals. So many criminals go free and are not punished. In addition, disobeying laws is so prevalent that it's hard for police to enforce laws. People say it will do no good to promote Christian values because people no longer support them. And they're often hostile to those who promote them. I became a Christian in high school in the 1960s and joined a little Bible-believing Methodist church nearby. One day, the pastor announced that there was going to be an issue on the ballot to allow the sale of alcohol in the township. I had not seen any bars or liquor stores in the area, but did not think anything about it. I had never heard of a township that was dry. The pastor announced that the church would be going door to door to oppose the issue. Every Saturday up until the election, the members of that church turned out to visit homes in the area. They distributed literature on the dangers of alcohol and asked people to abstain from all alcoholic beverages and to vote against the issue. This wasn't a rural, Bible-believing southern town. This was a northern industrial slum where alcoholism was widespread. It resulted in broken families, lost jobs, and violence. It was definitely a hostile environment for a church that opposed the sale of alcohol. The church was not intimidated. It wasn't a large church, only about 50 to 75 members, and it was alone in its opposition to alcohol. Yet as long as the church remained there, the township continued to remain dry due to the influence of that little church. When the church outgrew its building and built a new building just outside the township quickly voted to repeal the prohibition against the sale of alcohol because the church no longer stood in the gap. Too often, the church's response is one of apathy. I was pastoring a small Methodist church in a small rural town. There was a bar there known for its violence and the fact that women often brought their children because they would rather drink than stay at home with their kids. And they couldn't leave the kids home alone. The law stated a bar could not operate within 500 feet of a church or school if they objected. The bar's license came up for renewal, and both the Presbyterian church and my church were within 500 feet. Both the Presbyterian pastor and I called on our churches to file an objection. It didn't require going door to door or any major effort. Nothing was needed except for the board to file an objection. Yet neither my church nor the Presbyterian church were willing to do so. All that's needed for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Jesus also calls us to be a light. The law illuminates that which is dangerous. Almost all of us have tried to walk through a dark room, thinking we knew where everything was, only to stub our toe on some furniture because someone had moved it. We need to turn on the light to know where the furniture is. In the same way, God set out the 10 Commandments to tell us what we should avoid. As a result, the law sets boundaries which tell us what is harmful and should be avoided. And so it defines right and wrong. Just as the runway lights at an airport define the runway, so planes can land safely in the dark. Laws cannot adequately define everything that is bad, so they have to be very broad. A child cannot tell if a stove is hot or not, and so you have to tell them to avoid touching the stove until they're old enough to know what is safe to touch and how to use it safely. Many people believe that if it's against the law, it's wrong, and if the law doesn't forbid it, it must be all right. As long as abortion was forbidden by law, most people believed that it was wrong. However, we're now seeing the failure from Roe versus Wade. Although it did not legalize abortion, it said the courts could not enforce the laws, which made it impossible to prosecute those who did abortions. That allowed abortion providers to operate openly, in spite of the fact that just about every state had laws on the books outlawing abortion. As a result, an increasing number of people have begun to believe that abortion is all right because it appears to be legal. Until Christ came, people obeyed the law to avoid the penalties for disobeying them. Our natural inclination is to get around them if we feel we can get away with it. Christ came to show us the advantage of obeying laws out of love for others by his example. His example became a light in a dark world. Many people say we're no longer under the law and are free to ignore it. However, Christ stated he did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. We're able to have more freedom when we recognize dangers, just as an adult can use a stove once they learn to recognize when it's safe to touch and how to use it safely. But they should still use caution when they're around it because it still has the potential to cause injury. The law still gives us guidelines to define dangerous behavior that we should avoid. When we act out of love, we will not deliberately do those things that cause harm to ourselves or others. If we love someone, we'll not try to kill them, so we will fulfill the law by not killing them. We no longer are bound by the law because we won't have to be afraid of being punished, but it's still there to guide us when we're not sure what to do. Jesus calls us to be like him and to reflect the light. In fact, the name Christian means to be like Christ. When Christ comes into our heart, the Holy Spirit guides us in determining what is safe and what is not. The early Christians so reflected God's love that others saw that love and wanted to have it. As a result, they were attracted to the church. People today are often not attracted to the church because they do not see that love. Many people, church people, do not show that love, or if they do it only in the confines of the church, and the majority of unbelievers don't see it. Many churches today are afraid to speak out because they don't understand the nature of light and darkness. If you're in an underground structure that has no windows, and it has two rooms, one is brightly lit with a lamp, and the other one has no light. The darkness will not rush in and overwhelm the light if you open the door between the two. Darkness is the absence of light, and when you open the door, the light from the one room will flood into the other room and drive out the darkness. Light does not flee from darkness, it overcomes it. The Word of God is the light of the world, and when the Spirit of God enters, the power of darkness flees. The enemy works so hard to silence the church because they know that they cannot withstand the power of the gospel. They rely on lies to persuade people to support them, and they fear the church who exposes their lies by proclaiming the truth. If you light a flashlight in the daytime, you won't be able to see the light. However, as the sun sets and it gets darker, the light from the flashlight will become more clear. When it becomes fully dark, the beam of the flashlight will stand out clearly. In the American wilderness and in the Wild West, the coming of the church brought a great change as it brought concern for others and establishment of law. The change was dramatic as towns changed from lawless to civilized. In the 1950s, when the church was actively influencing the society around it, it tended to blend in with the culture because the culture reflected the church. However, as the culture has become increasingly taken over by liberal philosophy, the church has tended to absorb the liberal culture and its light has tended to go out. Many churches no longer reflect the love of Christ. The church as a whole no longer provides a beacon to guide people to Christ. The church needs to study the scriptures and learn more about what Christ taught in order to find how to be more like Christ. But more important, God's people need to surrender to Christ and allow him to come into their lives and to shine through them. If they do, they will become a beacon that will lead the culture back to Christ. Thank you.